This is our homily for Sunday, September 3rd, the 22nd Sunday of Ordinary Time. A middle-aged married couple was walking through an arcade by a seaside resort. They came across a machine that promised not only to tell your weight, but also to evaluate your character. "What the heck," said the man, "I'm going to give it a try." So he stepped on the scale and he placed a coin in the slots. A few seconds later, a little brown ticket came out, and on it said, "You are admired by many because of your intelligence and creativity. Your keen competitive edge places you in a position where the rest of the world is left behind." The man beamed at such a positive evaluation and gave the ticket to his wife. She looked at it, read, smiled, and said to him, "You do realize, dear, that they also got your weight wrong." Last week, Peter was on top of the world, like the man in the joke, having been told he was the rock on which Christ would build his church. This week, he is deflated, like the man in the joke, and called Satan by Jesus. What happened? Does anyone know Jesus Christ? Know in the sense of who he is and what he stands for? That's the theme of the exchange of Jesus with his disciples at Caesarea Philippi, the first part of which we heard last week, the second part today. Mark, who wrote the first gospel, as well as Matthew and Luke, who used Mark as a source, organized their gospel around two questions. The first question was, who is this man? Who is this man that even the winds obey him? Peter answered it last week when he said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of God." The second question, which starts in Caesarea Philippi, is what kind of Messiah is Jesus? Remember now, the Jews expected a warrior king. Jesus starts out our gospel today saying that isn't how it's going to be. Jesus begins to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer greatly from the elders, and be killed. But Peter will have none of it. He is thinking like the Jews, and he goes from being the star of the class last week when he said, "You are the Messiah," to being the dunce who is yelled at by Jesus, "Get behind me, Satan." And all the way to Jerusalem and the passion and death of Jesus, the disciples didn't get it. At another point, the mother of James and John asked that they be first in the kingdom. The others are infuriated. Another time, the disciples are arguing among themselves about who would be the greatest. They just didn't get it. In fact, the one who finally gets it is the centurion, who declares as Jesus dies, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Not one of the close disciples, but a pagan centurion. And the church hasn't always understood either over the centuries. For example, becoming an earthly power with palaces, riches, large kingdoms. The large kingdom of the church was finally conquered in the mid-19th century for the unification of Italy. Executing people who disagree or are different in the faith, which they did in the Middle Ages. Using violence to make people convert, or taking children away from their parents forcefully. Jesus was absolutely against violence and forcing people against their will. His call was to go to the poor, those most in need, and share with them the kingdom. That is our cross, not to look for suffering for ourselves, but to suffer put ourselves out for the sake of others, especially those in need. This is what Pope Francis is calling us back to as he asks for a poorer, simpler church, a church that stands with the poor. That is why he refuses to live in the apostolic palace. How can anybody be against that? Anyone who really knows Jesus Christ. Look at the life of Jesus and listen to his words. So the reflection I invite us to this week. Jesus gives us clear values to live our lives, values which help us show love of God by loving our neighbor, especially those most in need. Do I accept this, or am I like Peter, making it more comfortable for myself? Does the way I live show that I really accept it? I close with the words of St. Paul to the Romans from our second reading today. Quote, "Do not conform yourself to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and pleasing and perfect." End quote. God bless.